guys, my name's Natalie and welcome to Crime Vlogs Weekly. Our fascination with killers is likely down to wondering what makes them tick. We're intrigued to know what made them that way in the first place, whether it was nurture, nature, or a mixture of both. Were they born evil, or were they influenced in some way from a young age? This week we'll be diving into the case of the Toybox Killer, and this one is terrifying. So serial killers for me has always been one of those morbid curiosities, and I'm guessing if you're watching this YouTube channel then you're probably feeling the same way. For me, when it comes to serial killers, it's working out why they did what they did that intrigues me, and whether there's a series of patterns that sort of remains consistent with serial killers overall. The Toybox Killer is said to have claimed the lives of over 50 women during his killing spree. So David Parker Ray was born in Belen, New Mexico in 1939, and I'm not quite sure whether this is true or not, but his birthday is the 6th of November. My birthday. I don't know how I feel about sharing a birthday with a serial killer. I think this is the first serial killer that I've come across that shares my birthday. So there's not a huge amount of information on his childhood, but it seems that he was brought up majorly by his grandfather. So Cecile and Nettie Ray, who are David's parents, they lived with Nettie's mother and father due to financial struggles. And Cecile was a drunk, he was an alcoholic, and he would regularly lash out at Nettie, and he would also often beat David. Cecile would also supply David with pretty violent pornography magazines, and I'm not quite sure at what age this was, but I would think that he would have been quite young, and obviously at that age, whether it was, you know, pre-teenage years, it would have been fairly damaging to David, and something that no child really should be exposed to. David also had a sister called Peggy, but not much is really known about Peggy, and it seems that David and Peggy were split up when the grandmother died. During his school years, David didn't really have much luck at school. He was quite shy, and others would bully him for his shyness towards girls in particular. And I think these insecurities that he had, and also the abuse that was going on at home, would have likely driven him to abuse alcohol and drugs himself. And after David finished school, he worked in the army as an auto mechanic, but he was honorably discharged, and I can't find any information about why he was discharged, but he had an honourable one. The most harrowing detail about the Toybox Killer is that even though he killed over 50 women, maybe even more, their bodies were never found. And I would think that for any serial killer, that would be the dream situation. With no bodies to be discovered, it means that there's no likelihood of them ever being caught out unless something went wrong. So seeing as there were no bodies, the Toybox Killer's capture wouldn't come until a lot later, when one of his victims escaped. So in terms of his killing spree, it's said to have started around the mid-50s. He's known to have multiple accomplices who helped continue his tirade of rape and torture. These would include some of the women he was dating at the time, and also his own daughter, Jessie Ray. So why was he called the Toybox Killer? Well, he created a $100,000 torture chamber that he liked to call his toy box. Ugh, yep, I know. And just to add a little bit more terror to this toy box, it was also soundproof. That meant that when his victims would scream in terror, no one would be able to hear them, and for me that is the very definition of a sadistic mind. David is believed to have tortured, raped and killed his victims with a multiple array of tools and methods. He used whips, sex toys, surgical tools, saws, etc. He's said to have also made sure that his victims could see him doing what he was doing, and that they would know what he was going to do to them as well. He would also often get his friends, and I don't know who these friends are, but these friends to rape the victims whilst he would watch. And yeah, I don't know whether this was girlfriends or whether this was separate friends, I'm not sure, but it just shows how sick and twisted this guy was. And he would use these tools in his toy box to play games of truth or consequence with his victims. And coming back to how David would tell his victims what he was going to do, he would play an audio tape, which would be David's voice telling his victims what he was about to do to them, which I can't imagine being in that situation as the victim. That must have been absolutely terrifying. David's killing spree would come to an end in March of 1999 when he was 59 years old. Now this means that if he started killing in the mid-50s, then he would have had over 40 years of killing. Considering he potentially killed over 50 bodies, it doesn't quite make sense that that would be the amount. I mean, he's a serial killer, so he's going to do it regularly, because after you do it once, that urge, that need will come back. And the more a serial killer kills, the quicker it seems to get. It seems to escalate a lot quicker, and they're doing it more regularly, and they're taking sometimes more risks. And I think 40 years of killing, I would have thought that he would probably have killed a lot more people. So I think that there's likely a lot more victims out there that just haven't been found or have been reported missing. So on March the 19th in 1999, David approached the 22-year-old Cynthia Vigil, claiming to be a police officer. David said Cynthia was under arrest for sex work, and he put her in the back of his car and drove to his toy box. And once arriving back at this torture chamber, he chained her up, tortured her and raped her for 3 days alongside his girlfriend Cindy Hendy. Now Cynthia said that Ray would often tell her to refer to him and Cindy as master and mistress, and just like previous victims, Cynthia also said that he would tell her what he was going to do with her next. Now on the 3rd day, David was at work, and Cindy had mistakenly left the keys to Cynthia's restraints on a nearby table where Cynthia was. And of course, Cynthia, being the brave woman she was to have gone through all of this, took this as an opportunity to grab the keys, release herself, and to try and escape. Cindy quickly realised that Cynthia was trying to break free of her chains, and even whacked a lamp over Cynthia's head. However, Cynthia still managed to unlock herself from the chains, and in true like movie style moment, grabbed an ice pick and stabbed Cindy in the neck, and then just ran. She escaped. So once Cynthia was out of the toy box, she ran to a nearby property, got inside, rang the police, and then Cindy and David were arrested. Once the news spread of their arrest, Angelica Montano also came forward, saying that she was a victim of David's torture and rape. Not only that, but many other women came forward saying that they'd been kidnapped from Raymond's Lounge, which I believe is where Cynthia had been kidnapped, and that the manager at this place was also an accomplice, which I'm guessing was one of David's friends. So at the trial, there were 2 identified victims that came forward, and one of them was Cynthia, the other was a woman called Kelly Garrett. There was also a mother of a deceased victim that had come forward as well, and these 2 victims testified against David, detailing the tortures that they went through. After being convicted, David was given 224 years in prison. His accomplice, Cindy Hendy, received a 35-year jail sentence. His daughter, Jessie Ray, received 2.5 years and an additional 5 years to be served on probation. So in May of 2002, David got brought in for interrogation at the Lee County Correctional Facility in Hobbs in New Mexico. But unfortunately, he died of a heart attack before these interrogations could take place. With this case, probably the most significant and painful point is the fact that so many of these victims' bodies have never been found. I've always thought in obviously a morbid sense, but if I were to ever be killed, I would want my body to be found. I wouldn't want to have gone missing and then just never to be found or seen again. I just can't imagine being in that situation of the families who are missing their loved ones and not having a body to, put them at rest and to, just have closure. It also doesn't provide much justice for the victims, and I think if this interrogation with David had gone ahead, maybe he would be willing to give up the locations of where he buried the bodies, if he buried them, or whether he did something to them and then spread the bodies in various places. But in general, when it comes to serial killers, they don't really care, and unless it would benefit them in some way, whether it means they could, you know, get early access to parole, or, you know, they would benefit somehow or some way, then they're just not going to bother. I think in the case of David, I think it was a mixture of nature and nurture. Obviously the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his father and the sadistic pornography that he may have been exploited by at a young age, it doesn't mean that that person is necessarily going to turn into a serial killer. And obviously there have been cases where people have been subjected to that and they haven't turned into a serial killer, so I do feel it's like a mixture of both. And I believe that a lot of the serial killers that I have learned about, there always seems to be some form of lack of emotion or a chemical imbalance in their brain that they are born with. With David now dead, it seems as though he got off quite lightly. He got away with these murders and he didn't really even spend a lot of time in jail. Suffice to say, I am not going to associate a toy box in the same way after hearing about this case. Do let me know in the comments below what you think of this case, and also whether I have missed anything out in terms of the research. Make sure to also let me know what cases you would like me to cover next. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, making sure you click that bell notification to get notified of every time I post a new video. See you next week, guys.